Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Pride. Welcome to Generous Futures 2SLGBTQ+, Communities Impacting. My name is Jen McMillan, and I work as the Vice Provost Students at Ryerson University. And in this role, I have the pleasure of working with a wide range of committed people who seek to create the conditions for an exceptional student experience outside of the classroom. We're really excited about this panel today, and we can't wait to dive into the discussion. But before we begin, I really would like to acknowledge that Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. Collectively, I think we've been feeling quite deeply lately about how many of us did not honor the spirit of this invitation. I've spent time throughout this most recent period of grief, reflecting on my role as a white settler and how to hold myself and others accountable for this country's, and specifically our education system's, history of harm and genocide. It is also not lost on me that I'm a senior leader at an institution whose namesake is unmistakably connected to the systematized violence carried out in this country. To quote the Honorable Justice Senator Sinclair, "Education has gotten us into this mess, and education will get us out." I commit to do what I can with my privilege to support that happening in a good way, with the voices of Indigenous peoples amplified. Holding those thoughts present and turning our attention to today, I'm truly pleased to be moderating this panel in the Generous Futures series. Generous Futures brings the diverse identities, experiences, and perspectives of the philanthropic community to the forefront. This is a unique series that explores how charitable giving intersects with Black leadership, women of color, newcomers, 2SLGBTQ+ communities, and Indigenous perspectives. Before we begin the discussion, I would like to thank our lead sponsor of this series, TD Bank Group, for helping to advance these important discussions. TD Bank Group has been a great supporter of Ryerson, and we are delighted that they have joined us on this journey of understanding. Today, to kick off Pride Month, we are shining a spotlight on the experiences of 2SLGBTQ+ communities in charitable giving. We'll explore the role of philanthropy and how it plays in addressing 2SLGBTQ+ justice and equity. We'll look at how queer leaders are affecting positive policy changes and increasing the visibility of initiatives in supporting queer communities. I'll pose questions to the panel, and following this, time permitting, I will ask our panelists to respond to the questions that have been submitted by you in advance. Today's discussion is being recorded, and a link to the video will be emailed to you following the event. And I will really encourage you to share that video to all of your networks. Now, I am delighted to introduce you to our panel of leaders. Colonel Jennifer Pritzker is a retired lieutenant of the United States Army and an honorary colonel in the Illinois National Guard, a historian, businesswoman, investor, developer, and philanthropist. The mission of her private equity firm, Tawani Enterprises, is to invest in projects that preserve and build strong communities. Through her philanthropy, Colonel Pritzker supports research and education focused on advancing 2SLGBTQ+ rights and equality. She's a true leader, standing up to hate and discrimination. Welcome, Colonel Pritzker.
Thank you.
Following a successful career in finance, Mark Bonham became a leader of the nonprofit and charitable sector. Mark is an internationally recognized advocate for 2SLGBTQ+ rights, the author of 6 books, and founder and managing editor of queerbio.com. He endowed the Mark S. Bonham Center for Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto and supports many initiatives, including the campaign for Toronto's new 2SLGBTQ+ youth homeless shelter and Casey House. Welcome, Mark. Al Ramsey leads TD's 2SLGBTQ+ business development team, executing strategies across One TD. He has been instrumental in helping TD become a leader in the Black and 2SLGBTQ community, externally and internally, spearheading several initiatives to advance inclusiveness in the workplace. A recognized leader, he shares his expertise with various boards and committees, including the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce and Executive. Welcome, Al. What an amazing panel we have with us today. I'm going to start by asking the same question to all of our panelists. So Colonel Pritzker, perhaps we can start with you, then we'll move on to you, Mark, and then to you, Al. So our first question is, what is your first memory of generosity, and how do your memories influence your perspective on this topic? Please go ahead, Colonel Pritzker.
Well, my parents, grandparents, pretty much all members of my family have all been very active as philanthropists. Me personally, I guess the earliest experience, I must have been somewhere around 11 or 12 when I used to go trick-or-treating for UNICEF. That was a great adventure for me, and it was a challenge to see how much, I could shove that little box in people's face and, get them to give. That's sort of the first one that comes to mind. I know that there were earlier experiences, but that's the one that I think sticks out the most.
That's great, Colonel. Thank you. I think that's something that many of us can relate to. I hadn't contemplated that as an early beginning to philanthropy, but that certainly evokes a very strong memory for me as well. Thank you for that. Let's turn to you, Mark.
Sure. I think, firstly, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel, and happy Pride to everyone. My first experience goes back to the same age as Jennifer, and that is when I was young, and you'll probably get a chuckle out of this. I started a local fundraising event in my community, and I called it Sir Carn Affair. And it was literally that. It was in our backyard. It was a fundraiser for children's programs in Elliott Lake, Ontario, Northern Ontario. And I think we raised $20, which was a lot of money for a kid at that time. And it went to some local kids programs in our neighborhood. But I always loved that name, Sir Carn Affair. I thought that was quite unique.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. I think the name evokes a visual. I can feel like I can see your backyard during that event. Please go ahead, Al.
Thank you, and happy Pride. I'm wearing my t-shirt. I'm ready to go. When I was thinking about this question, and I was thinking about also my conversation with one of my colleagues, Joanne Ryan, who is a VP for Philanthropic Advisory Service, and she taught me well about charity versus philanthropy. And I was just thinking about the first time I experienced generosity in my life, and think about time, treasure, and talent. This is about the time people spent with me. So when I was 13 years old, living in Jamaica, growing up in Jamaica, I should say, my mom and dad, they made a tough decision for the family to leave Jamaica for a better life, to move to Canada, immigrated to Canada. And at that time, my parents left us with our family. And that's when I witnessed volunteerism at its best, in terms of the entire community came around to support myself and my sister and my brother. These are strong, especially strong matriarchs in the Black community, aunties, cousins, and just friends, wrapping their arms around us to protect us and volunteering and giving their time back to us. And what that did at the time for me was it marked in my head that about the need to give back to your community. And I've always maintained that is, how do you make greater good? So that what I witnessed, that generosity of people giving their time to myself and my brother and sister in helping us while our parents were away, I use that now in my day-to-day life, personally and professionally, and how I can give back also to my community. So that was a early memory for myself in generosity.
Thanks for that, Al. I love that time, treasure, and talent. That is a beautiful way to sum up the ways in which we can contemplate giving and giving back to our communities. Colonel Pritzker, I'm going to turn to you with a specific question now. The Tawani Foundation focuses on increasing awareness and acceptance of gender and human sexuality diversity. Can you tell us about what the process was to come up with this area of focus and why it's important to you?
Well, 20 Foundation has many other entities. It's really the foundation that I use for all philanthropic activity, to include things like historical, cultural support, some COVID relief activities. But I would say in the area of LGBT philanthropy, quite candidly, as a transgender woman, if I'm going to survive, I need to help other people who are in a similar situation. Nobody can survive totally on their own. So this is a way for me to connect with other people like myself, and for people who had some sympathy and support for the idea of inclusion for LGBT people. And philanthropy is one significant tool. So it can support things like education. I've been a greater supporter of education, things like the program in human sexuality at the University of Minnesota Medical School, or here in Chicago to the Lurie Children's Hospital, which started I think they started one of the very first programs of transgender health for children. And that's with the idea that I think doctors and scientists and other healthcare professionals are better suited to determine what should be done with transgender children than politicians and lawyers. So I've contributed to various advocacy organizations. And I've been up to Canada. We work with Mark Bonham and his various projects. And here I am today in the land of the maple leaf.
And we're glad you're here. Thank you for that. And I appreciate your candor. I think the ways in which we connect giving to our personal experiences is an important part of this conversation today. Mark, you're an active member of the 2SLGBTQ+ community and a leader in the nonprofit and charitable sector. One of your many initiatives, focuses on supporting 2SLGBTQ+ youth without homes. Can you tell us a bit about what some of the challenges and barriers are that you faced in drumming up support for this very important cause?
Well, it's interesting that when it came to youth and children, the challenges were a lot less in terms of getting support and raising funds than, say, for example, the fundraising that I did for Casey House AIDS Hospice, which was, I think, much more challenging on that issue. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is the issue itself, dealing with youth, is much more issues that are embraced by individuals and by corporations. So I really can't think of any business that when we talk to them about helping to support the youth center, homeless youth center, everyone said yes. It was really quite remarkable and impressive. But that was quite contradictory to raising funds for AIDS hospice. That was extremely challenging because of the stigma attached to AIDS. But the youth, I think everyone can rally around and support youth, regardless of the specifics of the issue. And that's the experience I had in raising funds and support for the youth center. It was quite remarkable that it happened very, very quickly, and the funding was there, and gifts in kind came in and things like that. And I don't really think it had a lot to do with the fact that they were LGBT youth. I think it was just the focus was on youth. And so support was quite readily forthcoming when we asked.
Yeah, thanks for that. I remember you and I having a conversation early on about that juxtaposition and your experience between raising money for Casey House, and which in and of itself is trying to both reduce stigma as well as provide discretion to people who are clients who are there, and then looking at when raising money for youth. And I imagine also an opportunity to educate about the disproportionate number of LGBTQ youth that find themselves in situations where they are underhoused or homeless as they are escaping unsupportive or violent in home environments.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that. Al, TD Bank Group is widely recognized as an ally of the 2SLGBTQ communities. I remember one of my first prides where I first felt like I saw a corporate logo with a rainbow, and that experience and that feeling, and it was TD. What role do corporations play in fostering inclusivity, and how do you address any criticisms that arise regarding this role and the related work?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. It's organizations play a huge role in fostering inclusivity within the workplace to start off with. But now we have a responsibility also to make an impact in society at large. And I see more and more of that happening given the rise of, addressing anti-Black racism, and which has been tremendous. If you take, for example, TD Bank, we can impact over 90,000 employees directly. Think about that, 90,000 employees. And in addition to that, our suppliers and our customers, the numbers, it's in the millions, right? So we have a responsibility, and we can absolutely advance inclusivity within the workplace, but in society at large. And I will tell you, I have seen that in terms of colleagues have moved along the journey of inclusion and being inclusive leaders. When we started off, our initiative 15 years ago or so, and how far they have come personally, right, to be allies. So it's very important. And then they go out and then impact the greater change too. I remember you remember the first Pride. Back in 2005, TD was the first major bank to sponsor a Pride festival. That was just, 16 years ago or so, right? Look around Toronto now. Today's Pride Month kickoff. A lot of organizations, you see rainbows, you see Pride flag. It wasn't the same just 16 years ago, right? So you can imagine how much an organization could make greater impact and change. In addition to that, when I started my career as the National Manager of Community Relations, and my portfolio was diversity, I remember small community organizations, really grassroots. When TD Bank went and sponsored or partnered with them, their equity went tenfold. They now evolved to a lot of how they on their own journey. And we heard that is because of a brand like a TD or a bank working together with them, gave them credibility when they didn't need that. But it's just the way society is structured right now. So yes, to answer your question, organizations have a huge role to play. And you know what? You're going to have that backlash in terms of the corporatization of pride, etc. The conversation I always have is, once you have an organization engaged, you start there. And then you lean in with organizations and you create impactful change. So that is where I anchor on in terms of the importance of corporations to be part of this conversation. They impact massive amounts of people.
Thanks for that. My follow-up was going to be, how do you deal with the backlash? But you got there for me. So I appreciate that perspective. Colonel Pritzker, education is one of the 5 pillars of focus for the Tuani Foundation. So wondering if you can share a story about the role that higher education has played in your life, and whether you see colleges and universities playing an important role to advance equity for students who identify as members of the 2SLGBTQ+ community.
Well, first of all, I'd like to follow up a little bit on what Al Ramsey said and the importance. I'd like to focus on the importance of the private sector voluntarily contributing to the welfare of the community as a whole. I'm not an anarchist, and I did work for the government for 27 years, But I think it's absolutely essential that the private sector, individuals in the community, organize themselves for various philanthropic activities. Because when it comes from the community, as opposed from coming from the top down from the government, any sort of private organization, if they want to, can focus with laser accuracy on a specific issue or problem. So to get to your issue of higher education, I've supported many universities, both public and private. I spent 10 years as a trustee of Norwich University of Montpelier, Vermont, just south of you. And I've supported, many other institutions of higher learning. I managed to graduate from one, and the Army sent me to a number of educational activities. So it's very important. And I would say it's really, really, really important that there be this partnership between individual citizens in the community and the government. One can't survive without the other. Both need the support of each other, particularly in a democracy. If democracy is to be the rule of the people, then the people have to participate. They have to become knowledgeable of the issues. And at the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, we focus very much on the relationship between the civilian community and the military community. We do what we can to eliminate the us and them, because in a democratic country such as the United States or Canada, both are dependent on the other for support and to function.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remember in the conversation we had earlier, you talking about the ability, to your earlier point about, the private sector being able to really target funding that maybe fills in gaps that other funding agencies aren't hitting, and the importance of ensuring that those gaps are filled in the ways that are supportive of communities. And I remember you and I, Mark, talking a little bit about in higher education, the importance of visibility and how things are existing for students, even if students don't avail themselves of some of those resources. The fact that they exist is a fundamental and significant issue to ensure that students can see themselves and understand that they aren't alone wherever they may be in their own identity development. And that's sort of a very sort of equity-based approach and line of thinking. So I'm wondering if you can comment about how equity and the social determinants of health factor into your decision-making when you're considering making a significant gift to an organization.
Oh, it's a principal concern of mine, or principal issue that I look at in terms of my personal giving and philanthropic activity is the issues of health and education and caring for the community and caring for others is absolutely critical in any decision on philanthropic giving. From my perspective, I agree with Colonel Pritzker that education is basically one of the foundations of a society, and it reflects the quality of education and the diversity, acceptance, and so on within the educational realm really reflects the society as a whole. And if you don't have that at the beginning stages of an individual's life, if you don't have an organization, educational organization that supports diversity, that reflects tolerance and so on, then you're not going to have a fully functional and participatory society at the end of the day. So, and we see that around the world. It's almost scientific to say that. So philanthropic effort should be geared towards supporting diversity and intolerance and so on. Tolerance and acceptance. So that's a very key criteria for me personally in my giving. And
Thank you. That's great, and that's very evident in the work that you have done and continue to do within within our communities, specifically in Toronto. Al, given your years of experience advancing an inclusion mission for 2SLGBTQ+ and Black identified colleagues, you speak a little bit about whether employee resource groups or groups of that nature have an influence on corporate giving, and maybe further, what role can young professionals play in employee resource groups to really try and foster cultural change within an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you think about what the Colonel has said, Mark had said in terms of building this ecosystem of support, first of all, we need to anchor on diversity and inclusion is not only the right thing to do, it makes good business sense. It's a differentiator for any organization. So it's really anchor on that also. And what we need to anchor on also, if you want to do really well and right in your organization to be a thought leader, you have to leverage your colleagues or your employees in the organization, right? That's imperative. At TD, we have this mantra. It's called the 3 C's approach: community, colleagues, and customers. And how do you build those connectivity between all 3 for the greater outcome? If I'm designing an employee strategy or a customer strategy or a community strategy, they all work together. People need to think of your employees of a real amazing brand equity, but also equity within an organization that I think a lot of folks outside their day-to-day activities with their people don't leverage or harness the power of employees' knowledge. Think of ERG as BRG. They're business resource groups. Employees understand their community better than anyone else. Okay? So, give you an example. When I was starting the LGBTQ2+ community outreach program, I went to our colleagues to tell me where to go first. Okay? Colleagues, if you leverage your colleagues correctly in an organization, they could advance inclusivity in the workplace and beyond and give you that differentiator. I'll give you an example right now. My mandate has been expanded to look at our Black customer experience. And I leverage that learning I had from LGBTQ2+ 16 years ago. And the first thing I did was I launched a Black colleague ideation challenge. And I got 100 of our colleagues across the country to come together, leveraging the power of our insights and knowledge team. And we put them in pods to ideate to help me understand how do we serve our Black customers better. They will tell us and guide us. And on the flip side of that is, right, what comes out is we can put that in production, we can help advance the strategy. But the new generation of employees coming in the organization, they're pushing us to look at employee ESG. They're pushing us to say, what are you doing? Why should I come to your organization? They're putting us on the lights to say, you know what, I want to, and it goes back to what I learned really well in terms of philanthropy, is values. How do we transfer values within our key stakeholders? And I want to work with someone who shares my values and vice versa. And that's what young colleagues are telling us and pushing us to move along the diversity, inclusion, and equity version pendulum.
That's great. Thank you for that. Colonel or Mark, either of you want to jump in on that question? Colonel?
Let's see, I got a little lost as to what the original question was.
Yeah, no, just wondering if you have any thoughts given the size of the workplace that you work with. It's more around how employee groups or employee groups, especially that might be formed around identity, how they might influence a corporate culture or a corporate giving strategy.
Well, I think what's really essential is the idea of merit-based inclusion. Quite frankly, one of my favorite examples of that is Jackie Robinson, baseball player who, by the way, played a season in Montreal. before he went to the Dodgers. And you just look at a few key statistics. The Brooklyn Dodgers, 47 years before Jackie Robinson played for them, they won 3 pennants, league championships, and no World Series. In the 10 years that Robinson played for them, they won 6 league championships, pennants, and a world championship. So by bringing Jackie Robinson onto the Dodgers, they were and focusing more on his ability as a baseball player, which, you know, if you look at his personal statistics, he's way up there in the stratosphere. The Dodgers were able to achieve their corporate goals, win ball games, get to the World Series, pack the stadium. And if you want to succeed in baseball, focus more on who can help you win. And the more inclusive you are, the wider a pool of selection you have for talent. So now Big League Baseball, in addition to bringing Black people in, they now scour the planet. There are players in the major leagues that come from Japan, from Korea, various points south of the Rio Grande and in the Caribbean. So the wider, if you increase your pool of people that you're going to select from, you're more likely to achieve higher level of ability. And the better people that you get, all organizations are built on the quality of people within them. So if you can choose from a larger pool, your probability for success is going to be much larger. So I look at it from a very pragmatic point of view. And I think it's fine. It's good to have focus groups. At Tawani Enterprises, the for-profit activities, we don't have really a formal focus group there. It's not that large a company. It's about 120 employees. But we do very much have a culture of inclusion of all groups. The basic policy is, if there's a job vacancy, we hire the first person that comes along who's best qualified without regard to anything else. We don't care what gender they are. We don't care what their sexual orientation is. We don't care what race they are. We focus more, can they be a net gain for the organization? And we push that really, really hard. And we also push a culture of nobody's job is unimportant. Everybody is there because we need to have them, and we pay good money for them to be there. So they're all important. And good organizations, whatever they are, they ensure that every person in that organization understands that they are essential for a successful contribution for the success of the organization. So, in the military, if the generals want to succeed in executing plans at the strategic level, they better have good privates at the base of the organization, and they need, good sergeants to be in charge of the privates, and good lieutenants and captains, majors and colonels to be in charge of them. But it has to function as a whole team. And I think it's very, very important to inculcate the idea that merit counts, your contribution to the success of the mission of the total organization counts. And as long as you're a contributing member, you have a place there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the whole purpose of philanthropic giving is impact to make change for the better. And there's no question that there's a direct relationship between impact and diversity and inclusion. So if you want to have more impact through charitable giving, be diverse, be inclusive. It's almost scientific as well. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you for that. We're going to move into the section of our agenda where we received some really great questions from the audience. As folks registered, they had the opportunity to provide and ask some questions of our panelists. So I'm going to move into that section. And Colonel, the first one is for you. And the question from our audience member is, Colonel Pritzker, while you've overcome many barriers, are there challenges you continue to face? And do you have any advice for how one can overcome challenges?
Well, I don't know. I guess one challenge that I'm facing now is I'm now 70 years old. And, you know, just like buildings depreciate and mechanical devices need maintenance and repair, that's one issue that I'm dealing with. And frankly, it's we live in a far more in terms of LGBT issues. We live in a really complex situation, at least in the United States, because on the one hand, there's been greater openness and freedom than we've ever had before. For example, in my youth, if a male were to dress as a female, that alone in many communities would be enough to get you arrested and incarcerated. Well, now that doesn't seem to be an issue anymore, yet we have a number of state legislatures that are passing laws against LGBT inclusion. You know, they want to limit what schools can teach about it. They want to fight the battle of the bathrooms. So we still have a lot of battles to fight. And I would say the best advice is gain as much knowledge as you can on the issues. You know, as they say at the Royal Air Force, British Royal Air Force parachute school, knowledge dispels fear. People will jump out of airplanes at night with equipment strapped to them if they're properly trained, because knowledge really does dispel fear. The more you know about an issue, the better able you are to deal with it. So I think we have we still have this essential activity of education at all levels. And I think for the places in the United States, at least, that we're having continued problems for the LGBT community, I think the most important thing is education. Because so many people who have the greatest opinions that are adverse to the LGBT community often have had the least amount of contact or knowledge. So there we are. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think part of what I'm hearing in a theme out of this conversation is also how we can use philanthropic giving as a way to facilitate that education and ensure that there is increased knowledge amongst communities. Mark, with many of the women's, queer, trans organizations in this country don't have professionalized fundraising staff. It's rather usually done up the side of the desk by executive directors. So what, in your opinion, is the value of having dedicated staff focused on fundraising, especially in regards to the value of cultivating major gifts and planned gifts?
Well, I think a lot of aspects of fundraising are very entrepreneurial. It's like running a business or building a business. Building a movement, a philanthropic movement, is very similar to that. You bring ideas to the table, you bring objectives, you bring impact at the end of the day to alleviate issues or to overcome certain issues. And I think if someone brings that sort of entrepreneurial bent to the table or viewpoint to the table in terms of what they're trying to achieve, then it is achievable. It's change can be made and impact can be felt. And so having that sort of, I'll call it a business structure around you, of a management structure around you, does indeed make that philanthropic effort that much more effective and easy to do. But that doesn't mean that the individual can't do a lot themselves as well. There are people who are just born entrepreneurs and they bring ideas to the table and they bring their own sense of how to achieve a change or impact themselves. And so I think it goes both ways. You can have that sort of structure around you that will create impact, but you can also bring your own talents and your own entrepreneurial vision around your philanthropic giving and have just as much impact and change at the end of the day, positive change at the end of the day as well. So it goes both ways.
Thank you. That's great for that. Al, one of our audience members wants to know how we can navigate being out around donors who are homophobic, and how can our workplaces support us with this?
Yeah, it's, you know, it starts from the top, right? And these are values, they're non-negotiable. And I'm fortunate to work for an organization that empowers me to live that, right? So I remembered, I go back to the memory of us sponsoring Pride Toronto back in 2005. And I remembered when we did that, we got a lot of backlash, millions of dollars were pulled from our bank. And I was nervous. I was brand new to the bank. We got branch managers calling us and said, the church just withdrew $2 million and what should I do? My scorecard is going down the drain. Ed Clark, our former CEO who launched our Diversity 2.0, and that is one of his legacy at the TD Bank, said to us, tell them that we're upset, that they're upset, take their money next door. We don't want it. Values are not for sale. And it's the same premise, I would say, when it comes to philanthropy giving. You look for people, your values, shared values, right? So that is, it's non-negotiable. And why would I want to work with someone who's homophobic in the first place? Okay, so I think that's going to anchor on that. And in my organization, I'm happy that I am supported in that regard, that I can express myself the way I want to and, you know, bring my values to life, where I can be on the board of Rainbow Railroad. And now I am their, you know, the chair of their lead fundraising committee, helping save lives around the world. And my bank put money behind it to help me time, you know, talent and treasure. They say, I'll be your whole self. On the flip side of it, I'm from Jamaica and one of the most homophobic countries in the world, and I want to help change the laws. So my bank said, yes, use your platform and help work with the legal network to challenge those homophobic laws. So I would say you get to anchor on your truth in terms, here are my values. Do your discovery. These are my values. And I think that is why you make impactful change. And then if an organization you know, don't embrace that, then maybe it's not the right organization for you to be in. I know it's hard to say that, but that's the way I approach it. And that's the way I've always been in terms of it's non-negotiable. My values are non-negotiable. So I don't tiptoe around anyone when it comes to who I am.
Thank you for that. Values are not for sale. I love that. That's a great way to look at it. Colonel, one of our audience members would like to know if you have any advice that you would give a young leader navigating their professional life as a member of the 2SLGBTQ+ community.
Well, I would say two things. One, I agree with the idea that values are not for sale. You don't need to hide what you are. The days of living in the closet, I think, are gone. You can be proud, but maybe you don't have to be quite so loud. The main thing is focus on what value can you bring to the organization? Why should the organization retain your services? They should, because no matter what you are, you know, whether you're, you know, gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, whatever, you're there to do a job. And if you focus on getting the job done, accomplishing the mission, that goes a long way. Because at the end of the day, these organizations, you know, if it's a bank, you know, they're in the business of making profitable loans, being able to attract depositors. That's what they're in business to do. And, you know, if they have Black people, green people, whatever, that can accomplish that mission, that's important. So it's not necessarily, you don't have to live in the closet. You can say what you are, be what you are, but focus on the mission. You know, you're there to, you come to work every day to do a job, and eventually, I think people, if you do a job, people will respect you. You know, Jackie Robinson had a rough year his first year in the major leagues. You know, they called him all kinds of names. There were instances where the whole team couldn't stay in a hotel. But once they saw that here was a man who focused on playing baseball, winning ball games. They came to respect him, and it paved the way for many other Black people to play in the major leagues quite successfully. And now it's not just Black people who are coming in, but Japanese and many other sorts of people. So do the job, accomplish the mission, but at the same time, don't live in the closet. You can be proud. Don't be too loud. Loud enough to let them know who you are.
So I can jump in a little bit on there in terms of, I agree with what you're saying, Colonel Pritzker, in terms of, excellence is the great equalizer. And if you anchor on that, I think that will do is that will get you a seat at the table. And when you're at the table, make sure you lean in and you help make impactful change. And that's where education comes in. I have seen in my 20 odd years in the financial industry where I've seen people who were closed-minded because they were uneducated about LGBTQ plus issues. And where I have, and the organization have been able to educate them on equity in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And now they are some of our biggest advocates in the organization. So I agree in terms of, lead with your whole self. Excellence is the great equalizer. But when you get that platform, you make sure you use that platform to make intentional, impactful change, because it is our responsibility to make it better for the next generation to come behind us.
I would agree. And a lot of that is reactionary as well, that through experience, you learn that not everybody agrees with you and not everyone likes you and not everybody supports you, but you have to use that knowledge as a means by which you can make change, and you can use your own ideals and your own morals and your own thinking about how things can be better. You bring that to the table and you push that to make the change, even though you know that some people at the table just don't like you or are opposed to your agenda or your personal thinking on these issues. But you still have to fight the good fight and say what you're doing is the right thing to do, and we'll have the right output, impact, and you just stick to it, regardless of that opposition perhaps that's at the table or is facing you in what you're trying to achieve.
And what I've heard all of you sort of reflect on is how far we've come in a relatively short period of time when we talk about, TD sponsoring Pride in 2005 and the ways in which certainly I can reflect on my own experience of where things were. And as I was going through the process of coming out in university to where we are to my jaw dropping when I saw corporate sponsorships Pride or started to see representations in popular media, all of those sorts of things. And Mark, your comments are reminding me of, we have a part of Ryerson's strategic vision that talks about being unapologetically bold. And I reflect on my experiences coming from an institution where I was like the only out senior leader to coming to one where it is very, very much more commonplace, and the ways in which the understanding, the culture, the values have evolved to allow people to bring their whole selves and to focus on the excellence of their work while being the unapologetically bold about who they are, who their families are, and what that brings to their lens that is actually an advantage to the work as opposed to something that needs to be accommodated. Thank you for this conversation.
And I think as well, being in a minority position, you realize that there are not a lot of support around you on many of these issues, that you are the voice, especially when it comes to money. And philanthropy is very much driven by those who can give a lot of money in many respects. And there aren't, in a minority community, there may not be a lot of people with a lot of money to give. So you have to, so when you are given the benefit of that, of having perhaps a lot to give, then I think it behooves you to to do that, to be more impactful and more forceful in your giving and so on, because you're a small voice in a big world.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions from our audience members. We're going to move into now on some final thoughts from you, our panelists, and then I'll move into some closing remarks. So I want to end the discussion today by looking into the future. And so for all of you, all of our panelists, asking that you give us one statement that gets to the heart of your perspective on the future of generosity. So I think, Al, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thank you for this great conversation about generous futures. And I'm thinking about, even my legacy, what I need to do as a leader in the LGBTQ2+ and the Black community. And, if anything that I've learned from my peers and my mentors and sponsors is really, it's about values, right? It's really shared values. And I think if we can create an ecosystem of folks that have shared values around the world, around industry, everything, I think that's where we can transfer our values together to make impactful change. So there's things I would say: be intentional in what you do, be consistent also in what you do. That will also make sure you understand where to say yes or no, right? You're intentional, you're consistent, and make sure you hold yourself accountable. I think accountability is very important. And especially now during COVID and the pandemic, adaptability also as you move forward, how you adapt to emerging trends in the world is also important. So that's what I am very intentional with myself and also my key stakeholders around making impactful change that can address systemic bias, racism, etc.
Great. Thank you for that, Al. Colonel, I'm going to go to you next. What's your perspective on the future of generosity?
I think it's absolutely essential that there be as wide a possible base of participation as possible. The old cliche that all gifts, great and small, a lot of truth to that. Or, the pyramid, another cliche, the pyramid of giving. The idea that in order to have a pinnacle of a pyramid, there has to be a strong base at the bottom, 10% giving 90%, 90% giving 10%. You need all layers of the pyramid, the pinnacle, the base, and everything in between. So I would say philanthropy is to be a successful tool, and one of the primary tools of progress within a society. It has to have as wide a network of participation as possible. So I think when you get kids, doing very simple projects, such as the one that Mark mentioned, or shoving collection boxes in people's face, or just simple things like volunteering during a bad snowstorm, shovel your neighbor's walkway. I mean, there's so many things that can be done by anybody, and that's as important as getting the 6- and 7-figure donations. You need all of it.
Thank you for that. That's such an important part of the narrative for folks who are interested in engaging in philanthropy, because I think it can be very easy to fall into a concern that what a small gift isn't going to make a difference. But when you talk about it in those terms, the collective impact is what's important, and it needs all players to come to the table. So Mark, last word to you. What are you thinking about the future of generosity?
Yeah, I just follow up on everyone else's comments that I really think that individuals going forward should have a giving plan, a thoughtful giving plan. It should be part of their everyday life, much as they own insurance or much as they own a home or they have stocks and bonds for savings. They should also have a giving plan. It should just be part of their life and a component to how they live. And when everyone, regardless of the size of that or where it ranks in terms of their other objectives in life, there still should be some thought given to philanthropy and a giving plan. And it should just become a natural part of an individual's life to give to their community, to help their fellow individuals, those who need the help, to make positive change and improve society as a whole. It just should be a natural thing to do. And education is a big part of that, of making that a natural process of living your life.
Thanks for that, Mark. That's a great takeaway for all of us to think about how we can incorporate what we would include in a giving plan and how we can have it be part of our regular thinking. So I want to thank the three of you, Colonel Pritzker, Mark, Al, for being a part of this panel. It was a really great discussion, a very important one, a very timely one. I'd like to thank a huge thank you to our lead sponsor of the Generous Futures Panel Series, TD Bank Group. Your leadership is truly commendable, and we are truly grateful for it. Thank you as well to our promotional partners, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Greater Toronto Chapter, Canadian Association of Gift Planners, Canada Helps, and Imagine Canada. And thank you to our audience and all of you for joining us today. Please look out for that email I mentioned in your inbox that will be coming in the coming days with a link to the recording of this discussion, and share it widely within your network. We hope that you will join us on June 23rd for the next Generous Futures panel discussion called Indigenous Perspectives Decolonizing. Details about this event will accompany the recording you will receive in your inbox. Thank you again, and take care, everyone.